call this meeting of the Westwood Finance and Warrant Commission to order. I'll grant permission to the Westwood Media Center to live stream and videotape the meeting. Is there anyone else that wishes to record the meeting? We are good. Well, welcome to everyone. Members, we have some presenters here, as well as the public and press. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance and then do the roll call. Oh, I gotta stand up. You gotta start, Mike.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay.
Yeah.
Bill Bruce.
Here.
Mike Gay.
Here.
Alex Yale.
Here.
Caitlin Jerzak. Here. Christopher Marks.
Here.
Chris Pareda.
Here.
Christine Cannon.
Here.
George Lahan.
Here.
George Maroon. John Carey. Margaret Driscoll.
Here.
Mike Powers.
Here.
Ryan Sturma.
Here.
Seth Fredrickson.
Here.
Susan Flanagan Cahill.
Here.
A big welcome to our newest member, Margaret Driscoll, who joins us tonight for the first time, just sworn in. Thank you for joining us and serving. And then in terms of tonight's agenda, we will not be covering Fire Station 1. There was a change in the select board's schedule, and they needed to be here, so they will be coming to the January 14th meeting to discuss Fire Station 1. So on the agenda tonight, we have Tim and Lemma to give kind of an update from a school perspective and start to give you what to think about coming into the spring warrant session. Then we have the Charter Review Committee here as well to discuss what to expect from that perspective. And Allison posted everything to OneDrive, so everyone should have it. And downloading works and everything now. So with that, we'll just jump right into it and have Tim and Lemma.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So for those that either don't know me or welcome, I'm sorry that your first presentation gets to be from me, but Tim Bevolvar, School Superintendent, joined by Lemma Jean-Baptiste, Director of Finance and Operations for the School Department. So we're here tonight to basically just provide a little bit of an overview of where we are in the school budget process. For those of you that were here last year, it's relatively similar to what we did a year ago, but I do want to provide just sort of a preview of coming attractions. So if we can, I'm assuming you're controlling over there. Awesome, thank you. We can just kind of actually skip 2 because the next one's just the title page. Thank you. So just to talk through the budget calendar, obviously we're in the beginning of December, so the first parts of this have already happened. Internally, we share all of our budget templates and sets of expectations around the budget with our principals and other cost center leaders, people like our, from our special ed department to our performing arts department, things like that. We did have a school committee meeting in the middle of November that talked about some of our operating budget priorities. And then we've been conducting meetings with all of our cost center leaders over the last few weeks to kind of figure where we are from an initial perspective. And they're submitting their final request to us on Friday of this week. We're going to delve a little bit more into discussions about expenses and revenue with the school committee at our next meeting on, that says December 12th. That's actually been moved to December 17th since I presented the slides, so that's been moved to the 17th of December at 7:30, actually here in this room, because it's concert season at the high school, and so we're trying not to overlap spaces with our kids that are performing. Because it's important when we present the budget that we're not just talking about the expense side, but we do have revenue that comes in from fees and other things, so we do want to make sure that we explore that. We are going to be delivering the budget book to our school committee members on January 10th. For the initial presentation of our budget to the school committee on January 16th. That'll basically sit and ruminate for about 4 weeks. We'll get some feedback from them. And then our public budget hearing and final school committee budget vote will be on February 13th. We'll then obviously be back before this body for your review in March, leading up to the town meeting in May. Moving forward from there. So our annual budget drivers, and these are here every year, so we have our contractual salary obligations. I will mention this is a year that we are going into negotiations with both our teachers and our admin assistants. I'll talk about that more momentarily. Obviously, the impact of inflation is not only impacting all of us individually, it's impacting the town, it's impacting the schools, and our purchasing power has been eroded in some ways, but we obviously need to account for some things that are variable and some things that are fixed in inflationary costs for us. We do want to maintain the class sizes that we have. Obviously, the most important thing that we do is the interactions between teachers and students in the classroom on a daily basis. Address special education needs, and those are many, and I'll get into those a little bit more further. And ultimately, budgets are a reflection of our values as a system, and those values are reflected in our educational goals. And so we want to make sure that our budget reflects those goals. Right now, we have a one-year bridge strategy while we're developing our next 3-year iteration of a district strategy. That's work that will happen this spring. Earlier today, actually, we were meeting with our group. Those of you that our parents in the district may have seen, we put out our draft portrait of a graduate. Our group was reviewing that earlier this morning. We'll be talking about that more, I think, at our February school committee meeting, and then building our strategy for next year throughout the spring that you'll see impact in our FY27 budget requests. Move forward, please. Thank you. So yeah, let's talk about the drivers. We are, as I mentioned, we're entering negotiations with teachers and administrative assistants. Speaking generally, 80-ish% of our budget is salaries.
Yes.
Of our operating budget. Education is a people business. You can't educate kids without really high-quality adults in front of them. And so we need to make sure that we account for that. And obviously, the negotiating climate has been tense in other communities in the state. I'm hopeful and optimistic that we will have successful negotiations here. I know that everybody is committed to doing that. But we do need to account for what the current negotiating climate is, and we building the FY26 budget. I also want to acknowledge that we have a residual 0.25% increase on our WTA contract from the last contract that was settled. So the contract that was settled that covered FY23 through FY25 in this year's budget called for a 2.5% increase on July 1st, an additional 0.5% increase essentially on January 1st. It's technically the 92nd day of the contract, but for simplicity's sake, I'll just say January 1st. So in building this year's budget, we did the 2.5% plus half of the 0.5% because it covered half a year, so we build in 2 3/4. But starting next year, it starts at a 3. So we have a residual 0.25% impact before we even get to the table that we need to budget for, plus whatever's going to come out of contract negotiations. We have our general transportation cost increases. We are in the 3rd year of our yellow bus contract. That's a 3-year contract with 2 optional year extensions at our side. We're currently analyzing what the climate is, but I think given what we've seen, the rates that we locked in 3 years ago as an option for year 4, at least that's a known quantity when it comes to budgeting, right? So we're taking that into effect. And then we also have our annual transportation increase for our students that are out of district or some of our in-district transportation for special education. I talked about this last year. I know Emily certainly would have talked about this 2 years ago, the changes in the Operational Services Division. This is an appointed board through the governor's office that reviews requests for tuitions for out-of-district schools. They have set the increase for this year at 3.67%. That at least is down from the 4-point-something% a year ago and the crazy 14.9% from 2 years ago. But it's still obviously higher than 2.5, right? We know that 2.5 is the magic number when we talk about municipal spending and finance. And it's something that we don't have any control over. And I also want to acknowledge that is a minimum increase. Schools can apply for more. I know one of the schools that we work with had a $20,000 tuition increase approved by OSD this year. So we've got to factor that into our budget for the coming year. Utilities, I just want to acknowledge that, we are not yet through a full year at Pine Hill. Pine Hill was obviously built as a really energy efficient building. But in terms of some of our projections about energy use, not only have we moved in February of 24, so we don't have a year's worth of actuals yet as we build the budget. It's also important to note that when we look at things like electricity consumption, the solar array was just recently turned on.
Yeah.
Right, so we don't know what the impact of solar generation is on utilities. So I'm hoping that we will see, I think we need to be a little conservative in our approach to utilities. Because we don't have enough on actuals yet. We have projections, but I'd rather not budget short on the utility side and be caught having to make an educational cut midway through a year because we under budget utilities. And then I talked about the erosion of purchasing power on supplies due to inflation. Our school committee guidelines for class size, and I'm happy that we've been able to hold to them this year. And our goal and our plan is to hold to them for next year in grades K through 3. We look for class sizes optimally between 18 and 22. In grades 4 and 5 between 18 and 24. And then beyond that, we look for reasonable class sizes, ideally not higher than 28. But you do have things like, for example, band that may have more students because of the nature of the program. So our current class sizes are within guidelines. And again, people is the biggest driver in our budget, so we need to be proportional to the number of students we have as we schedule. So I know when I presented the budget last year, I talked about two unique circumstances that are non-replicable. They're going to be real pressures at FY26. The first is when we consolidated Pine Hill, we were able to identify some operational savings because of the consolidation. So there was some staff reduction, there was some overhead reduction. But once you take that savings, it's not a recurring savings. It's already baked into the pie as you build the operating budget for FY26. The second thing, and obviously I've talked about out-of-district tuition already, and I've talked about OSD already. In the FY25 budget, we have something that I know I had never seen in my previous 11 years as a former district superintendent. I don't know if it had ever been seen here recently.
I had not seen it.
Lemma has never seen it here, but we actually saw a decrease in out-of-district tuitions that had to do with some demographic changes. We have students are in our financial care and educational care until they turn 22. So at some point you may have tuitions that fall off that have an impact. But right now, we are anticipating an increase in out-of-district tuitions for FY26. And so that's not a replicable situation that we had a year ago. And then finally, just about capital needs. We are currently in the process, I know I've mentioned it to this body before, and I know the municipal side is doing a similar exercise in developing a facilities master plan that's going to inform both our short-term approach and our long-term approach to our school. I mentioned our portrait of a vision, portrait of a graduate, and that work is really well underway, and I'm really excited about where we're heading with that. But at the outcome of this, at the conclusion of the study, we're going to have an itemized capital improvement list for every building. I want to acknowledge that that list is going to have a dollar figure that is significantly more than what our base capital can handle, because we have, six buildings. There shouldn't be really anything on that list for Pine Hill, obviously, but all of our other buildings are at least 20 years old, and they have significant needs that come with ages of buildings. And so when we look at what's on that list, we need to look at what can we address within our normal base capital, what potentially needs to go for a separate warrant article, like, for example, the high school roof replacement that was approved at town meeting last year, or what becomes part of a larger conversation about long-term options, knowing that we have the two big challenges of both the Thurston Middle School and the Sheehan Elementary School as two very old buildings that we need to think, and part of the idea of doing the study is we want to make sure we are not throwing good money after bad. We don't want to do a 20-year project for something that we might be looking to replace within the next 6 to 10 years, right? And so it's really important that we develop those long-range options that are going to inform how we prioritize, knowing that at the same time we still have a generation of kids going through those buildings, and we need to make sure that we maintain an environment that's safe for them and appropriate for their learning. So that's really the general overview of where we are with the schools and the budget development process, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee has. Or Lemma's happy to answer too. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks for the presentation. One question related to capital budgets and physical buildings, infrastructure. I don't personally know, maybe I missed an update from some other committee, but in terms of the use of Deerfield and the operational expenses and the building capital expenses, can you just talk about where that is in this sort of town context?
Yeah, so the school committee last year established a Deerfield Reuse Advisory Committee. That committee had an initial meeting this fall. It's kind of in a holding pattern right now until we get our capital, our facility study completed. So in terms of a long-range vision, really what that group is doing is they're going to advise the school committee on do we have any educational uses for that building. If we don't, the school committee then needs to make a decision about that. So the building is currently still within the care and custody of the school committee. That being said, at the same time, we know it's an asset that we want to make sure is able to be used. So currently the town recreation department and the town IT department have moved into that building, are using that space through essentially just an agreement where they're paying, I believe, for custodial coverage for the building.
They're taking care of it.
Yeah, they're basically taking care of it. There's a little bit of an agreement just for some of the maintenance that we need to do from a checking perspective. The utilities are still on our side of the budget at this point, but should there be a different disposition for that building, that's part of a larger conversation we'll need to have.
So there's still operational expenses that you're
We're tracking
shouldering
them.
the burden.
All the expenses since the students exited have been tracked on separate budget lines. We don't have a budget for them in in FY '26, we won't be proposing that. So this is right now just being tracked as like expenses that come in without a dedicated budget, because we don't know what the school committee will determine ultimately for this building. I do think, again, Tim alluded to the fact that we're monitoring our utility expense. The expense at the Deerfield hasn't been so large that it's not something that we are able to absorb. And I think when we ultimately complete a full year of operation with Pine Hill, we'll then look at our utilities budget, and we'll have the information by then, hopefully, about the Deerfield Reuse Committee and determinations of school committee on the future use of that building.
So will the upcoming budget have a line item for Deerfield, sort of lights on, figuratively speaking?
I wouldn't plan that way. That's personally been the approach that I've taken. So we have some places where we generate some revenue as a school department. We have, for example, power purchasing agreements for which we generate revenue, and we put that revenue in a revolving account. That allows us to absorb some of these expenses related to Deerfield in that account. I've been using that opportunity to just, absorb that unknown. And I think that that's a reasonable approach for the next 2 years. Like we could continue to do that. Long term, if the school department is keeping the building, we would want to budget for it in the operating budget longer term.
Can I ask a follow-up to, Alex mentioned, and maybe I missed it. So what happens when like Westwood Rec uses the Deerfields for like programs? Does the expense go into the school budget, or is that then allocated the expense for whatever, the heat, the electricity, whatever, or does that then get allocated to Westwood Rec? Who pays that expense when I send my daughter to a camp there and it runs 8 weeks?
So the expenses related to the building itself are on the school department.
Regardless
The
of
expenses
use.
related to the staffing that's inside the building and the program, that's obviously the recreation.
The overhead is always in the school, regardless of what the building is.
At this point in time, that's the case.
I mean, we partner with the recreation department and with
Just
town
ask.
departments, so sometimes there are places where we've relied on them giving us like in-kind services without charging us, and we have done the same, vice versa. So I don't think that the impact has been so significant that it would warrant the recreation
You're saying
department
it's a
paying.
wash.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we'll look at it in the future, if this is gonna persist to be a multi-year thing beyond the 2-year horizon, which right now I'm like thinking we'll have an answer on the Deerfield within that timeline, but I would say, it's not a huge impact. For example, recreation used the building significantly in the summer, but that building is not really air conditioned. There's only a small portion that is. And so, they were using the grounds. They were really using the building for access to bathrooms when they needed to, and it didn't have a big impact.
Yeah, and I do want to acknowledge, right, from a macro level, it's still the same pot of money, right, from a town perspective. And I understand, like, the differentiation. The difference is if they weren't in that building and it was an abandoned building, the cost of insurance to maintain an abandoned building would be significantly higher from a macro level, right? So from that perspective, it's better to have somebody in there using the building, even if the, agreement on where utility costs are budgeted, is not necessarily what would be the long term if this were a 20-year agreement. So I think I would rather float it in the short term this way, to be able to maintain appropriate overall fiscal expenditures.
I think it might make sense for the newer members to just maybe give a little context to Deerfield and kind of what some of the potential plans and what the school department is thinking about use, either soon or down the line.
Yeah, so let me give a little history, and then that last question, I don't know if I can actually answer. So just from a history perspective, I've only been here a year and a half, but Deerfield has been an elementary school, but when Pine Hill opened, it consolidated Hanlon and Deerfield into one building, and we moved all the students and all the staff from both buildings into Pine Hill. So as of February vacation of 2024, Deerfield ceased operations as a school. And so the question is, what do we do with Deerfield? That's why we created this reuse advisory committee. What I would say is there are conflicting perspectives on what should be done with Deerfield. What the school committee can ultimately, just to kind of talk about the universe of options, the school committee can keep it as a building within their care, custody, and control. And if so, they can use it for wishes that they desire, whether that is, having this kind of formal/informal agreement with the town, or have somebody come else into the building, or do some kind of operations, knowing that Deerfield has its own set of capital needs as a building as well, too. If the school committee wants to do anything outside of an educational use, they would need to turn over to the select board for them to make a decision on disposition of that building long term. And that obviously decision has not been made yet because we need to figure out what are the potential educational uses of that building and determine if there's any viable use that the committee wants to maintain control of. So I hope that kind of got at some of the context you were looking for.
Yeah, it does. I think, that, one of the things that I heard originally, and this may not be
Yeah.
still in play, is that having Deerfield, with the age of some of the other schools, is a good insurance policy. Should there be any issues with the other schools, you could effectively relocate some of the classes over to Deerfield. I don't know if that's still in play.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I would say it's still something that's on the table for discussion, right? Or, for example, if you were to do some kind of an ad reno project in a building, do you need to use it as swing space during that? Part of the challenge is, if you wanted to, and I'm just speaking off the top of my head here, right? So this is not a fully vetted, formal position of the school committee. But if you had an issue at Thurston, those classrooms and those bathrooms even are not designed for middle school students, right? So you'd need to do some level of work and repair. It's not that you can just plug and replace students from one building to another. So you'd have to have some serious conversation about what kind of capital outlay you need to do to make that suitable for that kind of an environment.
Thanks.
I just touching back on the capital needs and the assessment you guys are doing, I will be curious to see what kind of needs fall under Deerfield, which seems like a relatively underutilized asset at this time. And how that plays in with ongoing operational expense to keep the lights on, plus, hey, it needs a new roof or it needs a new boiler, and then we start sort of throwing good money after bad. And is there a time frame on this discussion? Is there a date by which an answer is due of what we do with the building, or do we turn it back to town?
Yeah, so we anticipate, being able to share the results of the facility study in the sometime in the new year. The discussion around a recommendation from the Deerfield Reuse Advisory Committee was by the end of the fiscal year, so by the end of June.
Thank you.
That's obviously subject to change, but that at least was the initial discussion.
And this is
So-
what's challenging about that is that we have to propose FY '26. So
Now, yeah.
we'll manage FY '26 with the unknown. That's the reality of it, but.
That makes sense.
Any other questions?
When is the plan for the budget to be presented to the finance subcommittee? Not presented to the finance committee as a whole. I was looking at your.
Yeah, sorry about that. I left that off. My apologies. I would say that any time between the vote on February 13th and when I'm here before this group, I'm happy to schedule and make that work whenever it's needed. I mean, I would assume it does not make sense to review a non-approved budget before.
Yeah, I don't want to waste
Yeah.
your time
Yeah,
or mine.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the special education tuition program? I'm just not familiar with it.
Yeah, so essentially and I would say the rates are actually really, really low in this district, the number of students that we send in out-of-district placements, because we have really robust in-district programming. But under, I always say we have both a legal and a moral obligation to give every student what they need in order to make effective progress with their education. For the vast majority of students, we're able to do that. We try to also, part of the law is that we educate students in the least restrictive environment, so that's in the general classroom if we can. Sometimes it's some pull-out sessions, and there are some students who have more intensive needs that are in substantially separate programs within the school. However, there are other students where even the programs that we have in district, we're not able to provide programming that allows them to make effective progress. These may be students with significant complex medical needs, complex emotional needs, sometimes combinations of multiple things. And the sort of range of out-of-district programs runs from collaboratives. So for example, we're part of the Education Cooperative. That's a collaborative with about, I always forget how many, about a dozen plus local districts. So like us, Walpole, Needham, kind of people in the area. Where we kind of pull together, there's a school where some of our students will go. That's generally one of your lower cost options. That environment may not be appropriate for some. So there are some students that will attend school, it's in a day program, so, or in collaboratives that we're not members of, collaboratives that may be further away but just have specialized programming. And so we have a tuition expense related to that. We also have a transportation expense related to that. As of this, on the continuum, there are also students that require residential placement. We currently don't have any students on residential placement in the district. That is almost unheard of. but that's sort of the continuum there. Also related to out-of-district tuition, there's the circuit breaker program. I haven't talked about that. But for some context, as a state, there's a state fund that reimburses district for predominantly out-of-district, but sometimes in-district costs, if the cost to educate a student exceeds a certain threshold. That threshold is, I don't want to get too far into the weeds, 4 times the foundation budget, roughly $50,000 or so. It inflates a little bit every year. But for every dollar that is spent above that threshold, the formula says the state should reimburse 75% of that differential. So if that threshold is 50,000, we have a student that has a $100,000 placement, they'd reimburse 75% of that delta, so it's 37,500. The challenge is, if we incur the expense in FY26, the reimbursement comes the following year. So we get the reimbursement in FY27, but also the way that we use circuit breaker, because we're allowed to carry over some reserves because placements can change anytime. They could change today, they could change tomorrow, in either direction, right? As students' needs change, or as students move in or out of the district as well too. But if we incur the expense in FY26, we get the reimbursement in FY27, but we budget to spend it in FY28. So there's a lag in the circuit breaker revenue that comes in terms of how it impacts the operating budget as well.
It's essentially students that live here in the district but require services outside of the
Correct.
district, and we pay for those students to get the service.
Yeah, that is a much simpler way of explaining
Yes,
what I said.
but-
But yeah, yes, that's correct.
And Lemma probably knows this. Could you just, for the new members, what's the total school budget and then how much of that is special education?
It
Just so they
was
get a sense of the dollars.
About 56, you'll have the number.
Yeah,
56.
FY25 proposed budget, or final budget was 56.7 million.
Town funds, we do have external funds.
Yeah.
With the external funds, it reached 60 million.
Those
That's
are
in
grants,
FY
right?
'25. External funds including circuit breaker, as an example, which we just discussed.
Yeah.
The special education IDA grant is a big one as well. So each of
Huge
those
last year.
account for almost $1 million. And external funds do include other small grants. They include Medco funding, they include revenue generated from fees, like bus fees, athletic fees, those sorts of things.
Yeah, and just looking at, because the budget's broken down into those different categories. So last year's budget, again, from all sources, was roughly 2.1 million for tuitions, for special education, and another $540,000 for transportation for out of district. I also want to acknowledge that we get an offset on that from a circuit breaker, but we also get IDA funding from the federal government to support special education program. That also, we generally use that here on our IAs. Our staff that support, instructional aides that support teachers and students in classrooms. But that's another external source of funding that goes into special education.
Yeah, and you'll see when we get to the school budgets,
Yeah.
you know, the salaries are pretty well set.
Yeah.
It's the special education and the transportation that have the most variability, the capital needs. You guys have changed so much in 10 years. It really comes down to those two numbers, and I think both of those have had a lot of volatility
Yeah.
the last few years on the upside.
Yeah, and I do want to acknowledge too that when it comes to staffing changes, you know, in last year's budget, we proposed our bridge program at the high school. So we had a staffing request that was designed to help keep students in district, students that have maybe returning from hospitalization, maybe returning from extended absences, to be able to help support students in district. You know, I can preview that there's going to be some requests related to staffing and special education in this year's budget. I haven't talked about this formally with the school committee yet, so I think they know it's coming, but I don't want to say too much more at this point in this venue. But you will see that. And again, when we talk about increasing in-district staffing, a lot of that is designed to help educate students within district, so that we're not incurring a much larger cost in out-of-district expenses, while at the same time better meeting the needs of that child here in Westwood, so they can be here with their peers. So.
Other questions from
Are we gonna consider, I know that we built the Pine Hill School with additional capacity, with growth, anticipated growth needs for the future. Do we know what that leftover capacity looks like, and is that being considered as part of sort of the program that we're looking at for, you know, the students at Sheehan, for example, and being able to?
So two parts to that question. In the short term, so this year, in Pine Hill, the school was built with 25 general education classrooms, 4 in each of the grade levels, K to 5, with a 5th classroom in kindergarten. The 5th grade classroom is currently, one of the 5th grade classrooms is currently empty because we had a smaller 5th grade class. That will unquestionably be filled next year because we know how many 4th graders we currently have. I mentioned our class sizes, we capped them at 22. We literally have 88 kindergarten students this year. And you'll notice that 88 is 4 times 22.
Yeah.
And so like we were on the cusp of using that 5th K classroom. And this is where I'm going to make my annual pitch that anybody out there in the community that's listening, please fill out your census form if you have kids, because we have found those to be much less valuable for us in projecting. So we're going to have to just be responsive to whoever comes through our doors. The second part of your question, absolutely, we're looking at capacity as it relates to the long-term options as it relates to schools, whether that's Sheehan or whatever else, because we do want to make sure that we are, part of the study is looking at overcrowding versus undercrowding, looking at not only from a macro level of the building, but also from an individual classroom level, our classes, what's the size of classes relative to the state guidelines that the MSBA uses. And so all that will come out as part of the study. And we would want to make sure that we, again, to use the point that was made about Deerfield, use the resources that we have in our existing school buildings in a maximized and most efficient way as possible.
Just to follow up, if, you will need to take into account when the project is done, Tumble Bus project, whatever you want to call it, is going to be a surge to Pine Hill because it's not going to be Downey and it's probably not going to be other, but that's going to be a surge, 175 units. I mean,
Not necessarily.
I can't predict the future, but I can predict that people don't move to Westwood to hang out in Westwood Center. They move to Westwood for the schools. Based on that prediction, if it's more than a 1-bedroom unit, you can assume in a 2-bedroom unit that there's going to be children. It's a reasonable assumption to make.
Yeah, and we have demographic projections that talk about that. I think it's also important to note, though, that those children are not all going to be in the same age and the same grade, right? So how they're diffused in the schools, it doesn't have as much impact as if you had 60 first graders all move in at the same time.
Agreed.
Right, so.
And also, when we had the University Ave development, I think there was the anticipation that was going to be a much bigger impact to the schools. And so having had kids go through the Downey at that time, we definitely felt a little bit of it, but it wasn't as great. So, and the school has the ability to redistrict from where the kids go to school, what school they do. Like, if all of a sudden there was a big surge, it doesn't mean everybody goes to one school. They have the ability to.
Could they split up the kids in that development? Some go to Martha Jones, some go to Pine Hill?
They can do whatever they want, but Tim, you can speak to it.
Yeah, so, I mean, the redistricting is a 4-letter word in the education sphere, so I just want to acknowledge that, right? So, but yes, to the point about can you split, that's actually what the school committee had been doing over the last few years with the residences at University Ave.
Okay.
Is that it was known as a buffer zone, which means that students would attend either Pine Hill, or Hamlin at the time, and then Pine Hill, or Downey, depending upon what the needs were. That was discontinued with Pine Hill opening because there was enough capacity at Pine Hill to handle everybody at University Ave. But that's certainly something the school committee could entertain if they wanted to.
Any other questions? Well, thank you both for taking the time.
Thank you all so much. I appreciate the
it.
conversation.
Thank you very much.
And look forward to seeing you in late winter, early spring. No, I do. I enjoy
Probably be
it.
this cold or colder. All right. Charter review. Welcome, and everyone. Allison posted all the documents that they're going to walk through. They did a great job laying out a memo for everyone, kind of highlighting where some of the potential changes were, showing a red line version. So they tried to capture everything so that you had all of it to look at ahead of time. So thank you. Thank you.
Does it make sense for quick intros for the new folks?
Sure. Well, first of all, if I may, Mr. Chairman, we have posted a meeting of the Charter Committee for this place and time. Since I do have a quorum, I need to call that meeting to order. So I do so. I call the Charter Commission meeting to order here, as duly noted and posted at 7:36. And
Will you take a roll call, please?
Yes, and I will take a roll call. Member Loughnane is
Here.
present. Member Hyde
Here.
present. And myself, Paul Fitzgerald, co-chair, is present. I'm happy to do some introductions. I'll allow the members to introduce themselves.
My name's Piana Hearn, I'm town council, I'm an ex officio member of the Charter Commission.
Nancy Hyde, member of the Charter Commission, former member of the Select Board.
Paul Fitzgerald, co-chair of the commission with Peter Cahill. I live at 149 Birch Tree Drive, and I am also a member of the Library Board of Trustees.
John Loughnane, longtime Westwood resident, I'm active with Youth and Family Services and other organizations in town. I live in Sterling Road.
Mr. Nora.
Yes.
I'm happy to just give an overview. As the chairman said, we have provided a number of documents. The first is what I would call an executive summary. It talks about who we are, what the process we followed to date, and it gives a thumbnail of the proposals that we're making in the warrant article this year, as well as those topics that we considered and are not moving forward with at this point in time. Secondly, we have a table which references each section in the charter. We have three types of changes that we're proposing. The first we call housekeeping. Those are edits that we believe are needed to correct typos, reformatting, renumbering, or comport with state law. Some of the chapters that we cite from the Massachusetts general laws have changed since the charter was last reviewed, so we've done things such as that. We call the next type technical edits. Those are edits that are intended to make the provisions of the charter clearer, easy to follow, or allow respective town officials or appointees to function more efficiently. I can give you an example. Under the town elected boards, each board used to have a provision that said what their particular functions they exercise were, that they serve without compensation, et cetera, et cetera. And what we've done is, rather than have each board have the same language repeated, at the beginning we have a safe harbor provision which provides that all of the boards in this chapter or function according to bylaw and chapter of state law. They serve without compensation, that sort of things. So those side of technical changes. And then the last are what we call substantive changes. That those are more obviously substantive nature. They're not housekeeping. They're not technical. They do make some changes in the way the various boards, committees, and offices of the town operate. And I'm happy to review any of those at this time.
Well, could you just take a step back, especially for the new people, and just kind of explain the Charter Review Committee
Yes.
and what you guys do and how often you're
Sure.
formed?
The town charter provides that every 10 years, the select board appoint a committee. We're not an elected commission, we're an appointed committee. There are various ways under the general laws that a charter commission can function. Some towns have an elected commission, some have an appointed. We follow the appointed provision. We are then charged with, by the select board to do an overall comprehensive review of the charter. We then look for things like, as I said, things that are out of date, best practices that we think the town should adopt, changes that reflect how the town is actually governed. It's developed those types of changes. What we did over the past 2 years was we interviewed members of every board, elected and appointed in the town. We sought feedback from them on how they function, what they think they do well, what they think they need to work on, ways that they can engage in best practices. We took that all together, and the first part of our work was, you will recall, at the annual meeting 2 years ago, we came forward and recommended that the treasurer and the treasurer collector and the town tax collector become appointed positions, which the town approved at the town meeting. We submitted that as a home rule petition to the legislature. The legislature passed it, and it has been signed into law, Mr. Hearn?
It has.
Has. We felt that we needed to do that at that time because the incumbents who were in those positions, who were people of great ability, public trust, were leaving, and we felt that best interests of the town in terms of its fiscal responsibility, accountability, would be served if we moved to have those positions made appointed at that time. Having done that part of the work, we then turned to the rest of the charter, and over the past year and a half, I have been working on that part of it.
Thank you. Maybe we could walk through the different pieces a little bit for
Sure.
folks and just give them a view of it.
Sure.
And then after that, talk about how you're gonna pull it together into one warrant article.
I think that-
and not 20.
The best thing is probably the table.
I think, yeah, the
that
table.
you have up. And it points to the section of the charter that we have made recommendations regarding, and whether it's a technical or a housekeeping. The only ones that we're making relative to the town elections is that I think the annual town meeting should be named the annual town election, because that's what it is. And it also provides that the select board can have flexibility and when that is held. That's something that we take as a lesson from the COVID-19 pandemic. That's some of the things, as we went through the charter, we thought about, what if we have another pandemic? How do we build into the charter the flexibility we need to respond to that type of public health or other emergency?
Well, we did workarounds during that time.
Yeah.
We wanted to make it a little more practical and have the guidance in the charter.
Right. Again, we just clarify that people take office at the dissolution of the May town meeting. People have always been confused, because anybody who goes to the annual town meeting know that you swear in the newly elected officers, but they don't actually take effect until after the town meeting has adjourned. So we just wanted to clarify that. We did some things about the pre-petition, when those need to be filed. We have in this town a ability for people who are bringing forward petition articles to work with town council, the select board, and other boards and committees to work, try to devise the best type of petitions that meet the applicable law, make sense, that sort of thing. Again, we're just changing business sessions to annual spring town meeting. We've deleted some unnecessary words. In terms of the Finance and Warrant Commission, the clarification we made from a technical point of view is that you hold hearings on articles not less than 14 days prior to an annual town meeting, and not less than 7 days prior to the date of a special town meeting. We are making a substantive recommendation relative to the quorum at town meeting. We still think that there should be a quorum, and under the bylaws, it's 175. But what we're proposing is that once a quorum has been established, it be deemed to exist until the town meeting is adjourned. We feel that serves two purposes. One, it assures that people come to town meeting because they know that that's where the rubber's going to meet the road. Secondly, it encourages people to stay throughout the town meeting, because if they leave, the meeting's going to continue without them. We've all seen at town meeting, after the budget articles are adopted, there's a large exodus, and I don't think the people stay for the zoning and other types of articles that really need consideration. And also, it would enable to save the town the expense of having to continue a town meeting to another night, which is always fraught with difficulty. So we're recommending that once a quorum is established, it's a quorum, and we would keep in place the provisions that the town moderator does at each meeting about ending the session at 11 and asking leave to continue if he feels that the business can be completed by that time. So that's the major substantive change we're recommending relative to town meeting. We are not recommending an elected town meeting. We're not recommending representative. We like open town meeting. We just want to find ways to make it be as efficient and democratic as possible. In terms of the select board, I think the only housekeeping change we're proposing is that the Department of Public Works Director be appointed by the town administrator. That's actually how it's in practice now. Again, what we tried to do is look at how the town actually runs and make sure that the charter reflects how the town runs. I'm trying to think if we have any other substantive Yes, the other substantive article that we're proposing that relates to this committee is that we would propose that every effort be made to have the Finance and Warrant Commission consist of 15 members, but in the event of resignation or an inability to appoint members at the town moderator's discretion, you could still function without 15 members. Again, I think that reflects current practice that sometimes has to happen. And so it would defend against anybody suggesting that because you weren't operating with 15 members, you were not functioning properly. The other change that we're making is that it would allow you, Mr. Chairman, to appoint members of this committee to be ex officio members of other special committees, capital planning committee, etc. We think that will enhance the deliberations of this committee, because when people serve as ex officio on the fire station committee, when they come to this full committee, they will have a lot of knowledge and expertise gained from that participation that I think will only enhance the deliberations of this body. And again, that is something that was suggested.
Optional, not required.
Not required.
And Paul, just one quick clarification. So you mentioned that the chair can appoint, but they also can serve with the approval of the chair. It isn't necessarily up to the chair.
Right.
Okay, just want to make
No,
sure.
yeah, but, right. We would just recommend that the chair would know who's an ex
Of course.
officio on what
Yeah.
committee. And that was actually a suggestion that was made to us by Mr. Posada and the former chair,
Yeah.
that they thought that would enhance the effectiveness.
George made that
Yeah,
suggestion.
and that would enhance the effectiveness of this committee. The other substantive changes of the other two boards that we're suggesting substantive changes is the Personnel Advisory Board. When the Personnel Advisory Board were created in all these towns, the towns did not have sophisticated human relations departments. They did not, the hiring was done by the Personnel Board, by an executive secretary. Now, best practices is to have a functioning and effective human relations director and a human relations department. It enables you to find the best candidates and hire them as quickly as possible and get them to do the job as quickly as possible. Right now, if you allow the Personnel Advisory Board to sign off on these appointments, it just delays the process. The Personnel Advisory Board themselves think that the better role for them would be to serve as an advisory board to the HR director and the town administrator, to look at the classifications, to look at the salaries, to meet quarterly, and provide guidance and advice. That, again, is something that they themselves suggested. It's something that other cities and towns have adopted, and we think is the better practice, given that we do now have a very robust and, in my opinion, effective HR department in the town. The next one, it relates to the Permanent Building Committee. The first thing we did was to bring in compliance with state law. State law requires that a school committee member be part of it if there's any school, what they call school building project. So we would add that to bring us into conformity with state law. But also at the suggestion of the Permanent Building Committee, they suggested that they have the ability to decline jurisdiction if they think the project size, scope, cost isn't worthy of them taking the time and delaying the decision-making. They think that the town administrator, the DPW director, the assistant DPW director, the school department have the expertise to make those types of decisions. For example, if they need new windows in a couple of windows, they don't need to go to the Permanent Building Committee, as long as they act consistent with the state procurement law and the town's policies relative to procurement. And again, that was a suggestion from the chair and the vice chair of the Permanent Building Committee. I don't think there's any other substantive
Housing
one.
Authority? Housing Authority.
Oh, the Housing Authority, correct, yes. We are required by state law to have a housing authority. It was never referenced in our charter. What we're proposing is, all that we're proposing is that the charter now reference the fact that we have a housing authority that is appointed and elected consistent with state law and the town's bylaws. It was the one board that was kind of, we had to have, but it wasn't mentioned anywhere in the charter. So we consider that to be a substantive change as well.
We presented it as housekeeping budget.
Right.
We were considering it
Right.
substantive.
I don't think there's any other one. John and
If I could, yeah, just comment quickly on the process and the proposal. The process, hopefully, as explained, is clear. We've met for 2.5, nearly 3 years, 17 meetings at least with various current and former town officials. It was slow, deliberative, collaborative, with the agenda of trying to make the town charter as effective as possible so we could run the town well. I would also say it was minimalist in approach. There's lots of good ideas out there about, hey, why don't we do this, why don't we do that? But unless something really needed to be tweaked or fixed or changed, the consensus of the group was really, maybe nice to have, maybe nice to think about maybe in the future, but, we're not looking to be revolutionary here. We're looking to make the document, work for the town. We also had advice from the state of the art, what's going on in other towns and communities throughout the state. We were able to get perspectives on that at various points where we needed it. So that was all part of the process. In terms of the proposal, it's dense, let's face it, talking about a town charter, but it really comes down to a one-paragraph warrant article. It comes down to a summary that we just went through, 2.5 pages. A black line which shows specifically what the changes are. The memo that tries to provide a little bit of a summary, then the clean version. So that's the proposal. And obviously if there's questions, we're happy to answer them as well.
And we don't have anything under consideration at this point to add to this. This is what we have presented to the select board and intend to bring through this town meeting process that starts here.
And again, if something comes up between now and the next charter review in 10 years, there's nothing that would prevent the select board from saying, we need to change the charter because of this need or to address this situation.
And
But-
the select board has historically changed the charter in between charter commissions in specific areas. One area that the select board changed, I don't remember how many years ago because they're all blending together, was you couldn't reconsider a motion on the floor of town meeting the second night because we were concerned that people would question the quorum, get out of the room, and then pack the hall the next night to get a different result. So we changed the charter on the floor of town meeting. I don't remember what year that was, but
It's been a while.
it has been a while. And I've seen it be effective to prevent that kind of thing.
I think the more recent change was the simple change of Board of Selectmen to Select Board. That was a charter change. We did that once it became a more common practice to have a named Select Board. And that went through as a home rule petition, meaning the state had to say it was okay. We had to go through our process and then to the state, and that went through with ease, but it still went through this formal process.
It's helpful. And so just so everyone, so this will be, they shared the initial draft, like one warrant article pulled together in
Right.
terms of capturing all the
Yeah,
changes.
as Bill mentioned, we tried a different approach last year that ended up really not coming together well. And we had 7 different warrant articles. And really where it became very awkward was the renumbering process. And if something didn't pass and another one did, and so we took the big step back and said, how do we make this clear, straightforward, which was our intent all along. And we felt that bringing it together was the appropriate way to do it.
And I also want to, our member Cahill is not here this evening, but he's been instrumental in creating the table and the documents and keeping us very focused on making it as clear and concise and as transparent as possible. And so I wish to express my appreciation to him.
And we should mention Lauren Goldberg, who,
Yeah.
by name, who's been our special legal counsel
Yeah.
in the state. She is a renowned municipal law attorney, and she advised us
She's been
14 years ago.
She's been an
Came back.
outstanding resource for us.
Yeah.
You can ask her what's the trend in the state, and she can tell you, well, 3 towns did it this way, 4 towns did it that way. So she was an excellent resource for us. We were fortunate to have her.
And the Department of Local Services in the DOR has advised us a lot on best practices. They see how every city and town does its business, and they're very good about saying, look, this works better than this. And so they provided us with a lot of good advice as well.
Well, I'm sure I speak for some of the members on this commission, but we appreciate the summary and the way you've laid it out very clearly, especially for somebody who's not legal and reading this stuff. It's very kind of clear the way you've laid it out with the grid and summarized everything for us in terms of what we need to look at. So-
And this stuff is thick, as been said previously, so if you, after you've digested it, you have questions, I'm available to try and answer your questions if you want offline.
And one thing we decided to do is hold forums or opportunities here at the library on a series of 3 Saturdays in January into February. I think we're going every other Saturday.
The 11th and the 25th of January and the 8th of February.
And this was John's idea, so John will be there to be available to the public. We'll advertise it through the town's communication channels so that people who may have an interest in this or have trouble sleeping may want to come and talk to us, and we'll be available. Well, it can be, but we enjoy it. We actually do enjoy it, and it's not for everybody, but we want to be available.
And as a member Hyde said, we'll make ourselves available to this committee at any time to answer any questions, clarify any points. We want the members of this committee to understand this as well as we do, and we also want the citizens of the town to have that same level of understanding, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you. I'll open it up for questions. I heard
Yeah,
George first.
quick question for you. So I heard and understood the point about grouping them into one article as opposed to separate articles because of the complexity introduced by renumbering and so forth, and that's a legitimate concern. On the other side of that same coin, I imagine, 99% of these are going to be non-controversial and fairly rote. Have you considered maybe grouping them into 2 categories, or perhaps grouping all the technical and housekeeping along with there are some of these that you have to do, right, in order to be consistent with state law, right?
Right.
So if one of these items becomes controversial enough that it doesn't pass, you end up with a charter that, to Mr. Lochnane's point, isn't effective and, a bulletproof document, to use my words. So perhaps grouping the technical and housekeeping items and the ones that bring this document in concert with the state law under one article, and then perhaps other articles to address the substantive changes.
Which is what we tried to do last year.
We did group it that way.
And citizens told us they didn't understand it, they couldn't view it comprehensively, they couldn't understand what a technical change here meant over here. What we're trying to do is all of the materials that we're presenting here, we're already putting up on the town website. People have reached out to us and asked us for clean red line copies, green line. We'll provide whatever people need to understand it.
I know there was confusion last year, but just to clarify a minor point, some of the confusion was attributed to, I think, errors that were made in the proposed draft.
There were a lot of
that might have been
contributing
part
factors.
of it, so.
Yeah, there were numerous factors that contributed.
So just consider splitting it up.
So George, if I could, I want to go back to your point.
Yep.
Your point's spot on. When we regrouped, we looked at it and we said, geez, how can we do this better? One of the things we did do was take out the controversial article from last year. It's not part of this package. We are not proposing a change in the town clerk. That was really, by many accounts, the controversial article. If we started doing buckets, we would get back to the same problem we had last year, where the numbering, if some passed and some didn't, it starts causing that same chaos within the document. So we did consider it. I want you to know we did. Your point is well taken. this is what we would like you to consider this year, is this one article.
Appreciate
And
it.
if I may add on, I understand your point, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
We don't either.
We don't either. So, as I said earlier, is if you go through it and you see something that troubles you, please reach out to us and have a discussion with us, or me, and I'll get it back to the group so that we can address that beforehand.
It's a living, breathing document,
Sure.
right? And we wanted to come, and I very much appreciate the chairman. He and I said we want to get here to you as soon as we can, give you members as much time to consider this, digest it, and I made a commitment to the chair that I'll come anytime you need me to answer any questions, clarify any points. So.
Appreciate that.
The pre-petition is a technical change that you want to have, that it establishes December 1. What is it currently?
I'm not even sure it has a date. It was something
Yeah.
later into December. And in that particular case, we're dealing with a warrant article schedule as part of this process. The select board opens up what's called the warrant. I think
First meeting in December.
they're early December meetings, so I guess that happens
Next
Monday.
week, yep.
And only keeps it open for a month. So if people are petitioners, citizens, are going to get advice and have a legitimate, a well-structured article, make it in that window to be put on the warrant, they really need feedback before a date specific. So we just wanted to say, if you're going to use the opportunity, which we want you to talk to town council, meet with the select board if you want to, we want it so you do it in time to get an article before the town through the warrant process. So it's just to precede that 1 month window. Is that,
Yeah, and so
Clear.
this would essentially allow folks to come in prior to having,
we already can.
the
Yeah.
article finalized, so that it can be adjusted.
So what happens if
Okay.
you're a petitioner in town, you're a citizen and you want to go through this process, and you want to have an article, you have to have it baked. You have to have the language, and then people sign off on it. If you do a technical problem, or what you're trying to do isn't worded right to accomplish what you want to do, you can't amend the language in the process. It gets put in. Well, I guess you could go back to every one of the petitioners, but then it creates this
cumbersome.
inability to really straighten it out. So we want people to feel that they can do it and get advice. They don't have to heed the advice, or they don't have to go for the advice. They can do it the way they want to. But sometimes, and we don't have it often, sometimes that leads to language that's just, you know, you guys would probably say indefinite postponement. What you did doesn't make sense with what you wanted to do, and then it didn't work.
Or after it gets adopted, the Attorney General advises us that
Can't do
you
it.
can't do that
No, no.
because that statute that you cited doesn't actually allow you to do
Yeah.
what you want to do.
And in Westwood, there isn't a big history of petitioner articles, but there is a history where they haven't come through well. And so the Charter Commission that worked now
10 years ago.
14 years ago introduced this into the charter so people would know they can get advice. There's a process if you want to pursue it.
And this just
so
clarifies.
this just gives it a deadline, so it allows it to fit into the normal subsequent steps.
Related to the quorum, the 2-8-1, would this essentially, could this potentially allow an approval to pass with fewer votes?
But
Okay,
it would still need the majority of the members present and voting, or two-thirds.
Or two-thirds, depending on the warrant article.
got it.
But what it basically says is that that's where the decision is being made in that town meeting, and if you want to be part of the decision, you need to be there, you need to be voting.
And you have to remember, too, people could be at town meeting and not vote. So
Yeah.
we don't have a requirement on the number of people who have to vote. It goes to, is it a majority of those who vote, or two-thirds of those who vote? You know, what's the threshold for that type of article? So nobody is required to.
And there are some towns that have a zero quorum. we're not
Whoever
recommending.
shows up is it.
That's it. Yeah, we're not recommending that, but there are some towns that say. if
Which
two
is
people-
becoming a larger number of the communities,
Yep.
as we've been told.
It-
I don't have we don't have the data in front of us, Lauren knows that, but it has been
My
a
son lives in
trend.
Bellingham, and they have a zero quorum in Bellingham.
5 people show up, 5 people decide what happens in the town for the next year. We're not recommending that. We think we should have a quorum, but we just think
The
that.
quorum is established by the bylaw, not the charter. So what we generally do after a charter commission is we'll have a bylaw commission to go through the bylaw and make sure it matches the charter. So that's our next assignment, once we get through this.
George and Chris, I don't know which one had your hand up.
George
first.
Which one's first?
George.
Oh, okay.
I yield to you, sir.
Oh, thank you, sir. Just a background on 8-1-4, just a background for the new members of the committee. This was a hot topic a year, maybe ago, about the town treasurer and town tax collector becoming, they were elected, now they're appointed. And if I'm understanding this correctly, both responsibilities now fall under Stephanie. Okay, good.
Stephanie being,
I'm sorry, Stephanie being the finance director for the
Yes.
town.
Right.
And you're changing it
McManus.
going forward. So from now on, will these responsibilities fall under the finance director?
It depends.
it's not required to be.
Say it one more time.
The position, they're separate positions, but the individual holds multiple positions, so the treasurer collector responsibilities falls under Stephanie, who's also the finance.
There-
All part of the finance.
So it's effectively been
There is,
consolidated.
there is no office of the treasurer and office of the tax collector anymore, which I think is what they're
In the future, that may
That's
not
what
be
this
It
is.
just falls under the.
So the
finance.
responsibilities now fall under, okay.
Yeah,
So
so it's cleaning up the language.
it's consolidating, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And so all of the bonding and other requirements would,
Makes sense.
Which is very important stuff.
yes.
Yeah, fidelity bonded is.
And that was
is an
something
important
that
thing.
the Division of Local Services was very strong on.
I just wanted to make sure I understood that. So going forward, it will always be under the finance director.
Under, in the finance department.
Yes, who is
Yeah.
run by the finance.
Yep.
Chris.
So,
I yield
thank
to you now.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much for all that you've done and how you've prepared this. This is excellent. And I had a good chance of going over the most recent red line copy, although this was blue. And especially the memo. I thought the memo was very well prepared and explained a lot to me. So thank you very much for all your hard work, and thank you very much for regrouping after last year. I do have a couple of thoughts, though. Let me try to plant some seeds for future thought. One is an issue that came up when George and I met with you last year. And actually, we didn't bring it up, it was town council brought it up. But I think it's one that you should consider again, and it's under the petition articles. It's under section 5 of chapter 2. And the question is, putting some language in there that says that a member of the Finance and Warrant Commission cannot be a lead petitioner. We all give up some personal rights when we become members of the Finance Commission because we're subject to the ethics laws. So I don't see that as an infringement on their freedom of speech rights or anything like that. It's just, this is the consequence of being a member of the Finance and Warrants Commission, that it is inappropriate for you to then be a lead petitioner for a petition article. Just a thought. I noticed that you changed the appointment of the Director of Public Works from the Select Board to the Town Administrator. Now, a couple of years ago, I heard a very persuasive argument by town leader that the Department of Public Works was just as critical to public safety as the police department and the fire department. And on that basis, this commission reorganized its subcommittee structure to include Public Works in the Public Safety Subcommittee, right? So how does the present Public Works Director feel about
the comment was, well, that's how the town works now. But the charter right now says it's appointed by the select board. So obviously you weren't suggesting that that the present guy was appointed improperly.
No.
No.
We used to have an executive secretary, not even a town administrator. There's different ways you can go. You can have an executive secretary, which is the weakest of all types of administrator for a town, and you have a town administrator, which is the next level up, which is what we practice, and then you have a town manager, and a town manager has extensive powers that the Board of Selectmen, this town retain for themselves or with the town administrator. So as you move to a town administrator position, you need to give that administrator the flexibility and the authority he needs to perform his functions and make sure that on a day-to-day basis the town is run, the services get provided. So that's the spirit of that. There were other changes that we made relative to the town administrator position about what kind of contracts he can approve, who can be an acting town administrator. It's just in the interest of giving the person the tools they need to do the job.
I guess my question then is, what differentiates the Department of Public Works from the Police Department and Fire Department in this context? Why don't we move the appointment of the police chief and fire chief to the town administrator?
Well, that would be something the select board could suggest at any time. They didn't suggest that to us. We did meet with the select board.
But the select board did suggest moving.
They thought this was the proper thing to do.
I'm a little bit concerned because as I said, I feel the Department of Public Works is just as critical to public safety as the police chief and the police department and the fire department. So I think they should be treated the same, and I think they should get the same level of appointment. But
well, I would leave that to the town administrator to talk about he knows how he works with the select board. And
town administrator was the one that convinced me that they were just as critical.
So,
And I will say that again today.
so I guess there's an appointment
Yeah?
and then there's operating. So so DPW director may have historically been appointed by the Board of Selectmen, but he reports to the town administrator for operations.
Sure, I get that.
So
That makes
I believe.
perfect sense.
Let me pontificate.
Sure.
I believe that when you hire someone, during the hiring process, you have an unofficial contract, and that's where that starts. So I think this change helps facilitate that unofficial contract moving forward.
And not with the police chief or fire. Right.
No, I don't think that's, I'm not ready to make that jump. I am ready to make that jump with the DPW director.
Okay, so in your mind, there's a distinction between the police chief and fire chief and the DPW director?
I'm not saying either are more important than the other. We couldn't function without all three of them.
Right.
But I do believe there's a distinction, yes.
And I suggest that the municipal finance director is a critical position, because if you don't have your finances in order, or your police department, your fire department, and your public works department aren't going to be able to function.
All right.
And that person reports to the town administrator. I think it's important to give people that you entrust with the responsibility the tools they need to do the job.
And Chris, I would say, having been on the hiring side from the select board, your point's well taken. I mean, it can be done either way. It's going to work fine, I think, would be my personal takeaway.
Would you say the select board would have input into that appointment?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. And as we have historically in hiring other people that get hired by the town administrator, the select board would be engaged because they are important positions.
Okay.
It does sometimes become, I don't know, it's not always easy when the select board is directly involved in the hiring. You know, there are different
That's
idiosyncrasies.
So-
So I think we do it well to hire really good people, and the right people are brought in the room to that interview process. We have a professional human resource director who puts out a process, who brings in candidates, who screens the initial round either with the town administrator or with select people. and then they figure out who to interview, and then bring in a team of people, and most of our interviews are a few people in the room. You have to, play ping pong ball all around. So we do it well. We hire really good people.
Let me ask one final question on this issue, and that is, does it make a difference in trying to remove that person depending upon how they're appointed?
I believe it does
I
from
think it
an
does.
executive session standpoint,
I
if
think
you
it
want
does,
to
but-
cancel a contract.
But I've been around town government for 30-something years, and I'm only on my third DPW director.
Right.
So it's not like a position that we're
It's a revolving door, right?
turning over.
But the contracts themselves, Chris, get renewed
Vetted.
Yeah,
with the
sure.
select board members. I'm just going through in my head, so I'm sort of looking in my head right now. And there is a technical process that if you are discussing something, a personnel matter that's done in executive session, the individual has a right to be present in that, can choose not to be. So there's a lot of governance around, I want to say terminations, but fortunately, we don't
Yeah, we don't
tend to
need
do that.
So,
But contracts, right?
yeah, and it's a contract position,
Yeah.
so the select board can decide through the town administrator not to offer a new contract for someone they don't
true.
like.
As Nancy says, we tend to do it well here. I can speak from the library trustees position. The library trustees hire the library director. But when we went through the process of hiring the new library director, we had the town administrator and the HR department involved in that, so that we relied on their expertise, their judgment, their sense of, what we should be asking, what we should be looking for. So at the end of the day, it was the library board's appointment, but it was done in conjunction with the town, because on a day-to-day basis, Lizzie McGovern works with the town administrator.
Right.
So it does, collaborative does produce a good result.
It-
Can I ask just a quick
the-
related question? Just in terms of the document, which is very helpful, but hearing the discussion, you do have this characterized as housekeeping, and I understand why it might not necessarily be substantive, but do you think it's fair to characterize this change as housekeeping? Just thinking of how people might view it, don't want to lose.
I had the same thought,
I
too.
was gonna mention that earlier. These labels
Yeah.
Are ours.
Not perfect. They're-
Not
yeah.
perfect.
No, they're not.
I
But
actually meant to mention that earlier.
Right.
What's technical, what's housekeeping?
Yeah.
We're trying to fully disclose, so we might
Right,
not
no,
have
which
the
I
right label on
appreciate.
it.
If everything is
Bucket 2
substantive,
and bucket 3.
right, if everything is substantive, nothing is substantive, right?
Well, no, I think you have the helpful definitions, but
Right.
just,
Right.
this
If some, I
one
mean,
strikes me as
if
maybe
somebody would say they think
taking
that's
another
more
look at
technical
it.
change, I'm not gonna,
yeah.
that's a fair
It's a
reason.
fair observation, and,
We'll update that.
Mo-
Yeah.
Moving the DPW director is not as hot button issue as the town clerk was, so I just want to make sure that I'm
And
not,
we
I'm all upset
appreciate
about that.
you bringing it up, because this is a good discussion. I mean, through everything we're trying to answer, we hope we're educating you as well as to how our government in town works.
One more quick thing. The new paragraph O on the duties of the town administrator. And I understand the need, this talks about, no, I guess not paragraph O. Paragraph I. I understand the need to change the dollar amount for contracts, because that number was probably put in there
In the
a long
Eons
time
ago.
ago.
In the 50s perhaps?
Eons ago. Small
When
projects
gas
are
was
now.
25 cents a gallon?
Yeah, right. But eliminating it entirely,
Right.
does that basically allow the select board to say, to set it so high that the town administrator then has carte blanche?
Well, the town administrator is not only constrained by the charter, he's also constrained by the state procurement laws,
30B.
30B.
And what limit is that?
That says what amount you can just seek quotes on, what amounts you have to get an invitation for bid, what amounts you have to do a request for proposal, what requires a peer review.
Yes,
Yep.
it's extensive.
All right, so that satisfies my concern.
And state law, since cities and towns are political subdivisions and creatures of the Commonwealth, state law does the triumph.
Right,
And-
Trump it all.
okay.
And virtually every contract, I have to review, Chris has to review.
Right.
Maria Leary has to review to make sure there's money in the budget. So nothing goes out unless three of us sign off on it.
All right, thank you very much for that answer. That's all.
Any other questions?
Oh, I was just gonna, one recommendation. I went to the link for the thing, that document. So one, thank you. I love the fact that we have the draft of the warrant article. So I really appreciate all of this. And I appreciate actually how this is worded so that you don't have a 20-page long warrant article. I would just recommend, we make sure that we have the name of that file right there on top, and even like dated, like version controlled, referenced here, just so nobody can nitpick and say, oh, it's the wrong version, that was this, like this, the name of this document's not on that site right now, maybe
No,
that's by
because this
design.
article hasn't been,
Right, that's fine, I just wanted to point that out if it was
Yes.
really tight.
This is in draft form
You're
right now.
Yeah,
You're
that's fine,
trying to
but-
keep us from repeating
But I
silly
went
mistakes.
I went to the link.
right now, the table is on the website, the red line is on the website, and I believe the executive memo is on the website.
So noted.
And
Having this here is great, though, thank you.
and on the website, it really is red.
Yes.
But are you colorblind? Can you see the
I'm
red?
sorry?
Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you guys for the time and answering all
Again-
the questions. And
again,
If
uh,
others if you have more questions after, just
It's early
let us
December.
know
We
if
have time
we
to
need them to
make
come to
sure you're
another
all
meeting, or if it's
comfortable.
just one question.
Yeah.
Send it to Allison
Yes, yeah.
and we can pass it
If,
along.
if I may, Mr. Chairman, I
Yeah.
would like to
Oh, yeah,
adjourn
closer.
the meeting of the Charter Commission. I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Made by Member Hyde,
Second.
seconded by Member Loughnane. I will call the roll. Member Hyde?
Aye.
Member
Aye.
Loughnane?
Aye.
Chair votes in the affirmative. We are adjourned.
Thank you very much.
Thank you guys.
Thanks a lot.
So quick chair update, then a vice chair update. Especially for a third of the group that's new. It'll start getting busy in January. We have the meetings every other week. We'll still do our best to try to balance hybrid where we can, but when there's big topics and a lot of discussion, we'll do them in person. And you'll start to see more of the budget process as well. We'll come back at the next meeting and discuss more probably in the chair update, but we're looking at a way, we're gonna streamline the report out process in early March, and look at that a little closer to make it, a little less intensive for everyone, and more of like an executive summary type review format, so some more to come with that. And that's kind of probably my big updates, and then I know you have one.
Sure. Very quickly, Allison on November 15th shared an email with a couple of attachments on how the subcommittees should post any subcommittee meetings. So everybody should have gotten that. If you didn't receive it, we will get it out to you. Effectively, all subcommittee meetings with greater than one individual with either yourself or anybody else need to be posted. And we've put the exact process that you have to follow. One thing that we didn't put in there is that if you're holding in-person meetings, they have to be held in handicap accessible locations so the public can attend. So it's recommended if your home or the place that you're meeting isn't handicap accessible, to choose one of the locations within the town. There are a number of spots. We're happy to share all of those with
And
you.
Allison can help
Yeah.
reserve space.
Yeah, and it was, it was actually through interaction with some of the people that were asking questions about the last meeting of one of the subcommittees that we identified that there was this gap. So we're hopefully really clear there. We want to comply with open meeting law. And in the event that you are meeting in remote, then you need to provide a Zoom link or some sort of a web meeting so the public can attend. So those meetings will not be covered by Westwood Media Center. They will be, just for the subcommittee. Any questions on that, or is everybody pretty clear? Awesome. Sounds great. The minutes?
Well, I think new business first. I don't have the agenda in front of me. Any new business anyone wants to bring from the group? We're getting to public in a minute.
Yep.
All right.
Do we want to hear from any of our new members? Just a quick,
Intro.
hello and background, yeah.
Here we go.
There's a few, I think.
Great business.
Sure. Margaret Driscoll, I work for IBM as a product manager, and I live on Deerfield Ave in Westwood.
Awesome.
IBM stands for the Itty Bitty Machine Company.
That's the one.
Welcome. I think you introduced yourself last time, but for some of the people that weren't here.
The second newest member, Christine Cannon Coughlin, 56 Gay Street. This is, I've only been on the committee for a couple of months now. My background has been in commercial real estate, brokerage development, have an MBA from Babson, undergraduate degree from Northeastern, 4 young kids, and have been in the community for a little less than 10 years.
Awesome.
Welcome.
Great, thank you.
Old business.
Approval of the,
Anybody want to make a motion?
well, yeah, I'll make a motion
We have
to,
do two of them.
yeah, motion to approve the 10/8/24 minutes. Everybody should have received that in the OneDrive.
Second?
Second.
Roll call? Yeah.
Yeah.
We have to roll call. Oh, no, here we don't, sorry.
We're here.
Yeah,
Yeah, we just-
yeah, there we
All
go.
those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
There we go. Like-
Unanimous.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the November 12th, 24 minutes.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, I have to abstain.
Opposed?
So noted.
Approved.
Approved.
Next
public
up,
and press.
public and press for comments. I'm going to ask that if you want to speak, could you come up to the microphone, and then you
Up
just
here.
have to say your,
Stand up,
oh,
yeah.
that
Yeah,
microphone,
yeah.
sorry.
Unless you
I
want to
think
say.
that one works too, but just say your name, address.
Sure.
and then-
Paul DeMayo, 40 Hillcrest Place. First, I missed the beginning. Can we explain why the select board wasn't here tonight?
They couldn't make the meeting, so we're not having the FS1 discussion until next month.
Okay, so is this committee aware of the legal action that's being brought by the abutters in most of the neighborhood regarding the FS1 project as proposed?
As a FinCom, we are not.
Correct.
Well, that is taking place. I thought you guys should know that. I think our question really is, how do you plan on proceeding if in fact, well, the fact that there is legal action coming forward? And I guess, why didn't you think they were here?
I mean, I can't speak to that.
Okay. So how would you
In
proceed?
public comment, a welcome dialogue, we're here to answer. We can't answer questions outside the scope of
Okay.
what we do.
All right, so I guess, really that was my question, is whether you were aware that many of the neighborhood and all of the abutters are opposed to the project.
In its
I just
current,
thought-
in
I
its
thought-
current form.
In its current form, exactly, as proposed. Many efforts were made on our end to try to make something happen in that regard, and we just haven't gotten anywhere. So I just wanted the finance committee, because you guys are the money people, I wanted you guys to know that, and that there's been a good faith effort on our end, and we're hoping to have a good faith effort on the other. But the reality is, there is legal action now in place.
No, we appreciate you coming and sharing that, because I'm sure.
Is there a public link for the legal action, or is that?
It's been given to the town.
It's been given to
The clerk
okay.
has it.
Yeah, okay.
And does that detail all the concerns that the abutters have with the project?
It should.
So is
It
that
does.
something that could be discovered by this commission?
We'll definitely
I-
talk to town
Well,
I mean,
have to take it
I
back
could tell
to
you that
Pat.
seven variances and a special permit, in that allotted space. I mean, I don't think any one of you could probably come up with what 7 variances could actually be in a building. There's only 6 directions. Up, down, side, back, forth. You couldn't guess the 7th one, I'm sure. So.
Would you like
Yeah,
to tell us it,
The
or?
FinCom.
Oh, it's a dumpster and a generator.
The
that
FinCom
they have
isn't-
no room to move.
Yeah, Paul, the FinCom isn't in a position to even comment intelligently, so I think, we'll, at the appropriate time with FS1, I know there were some public meetings that were planned, certainly a bunch that have taken place. we only have what comes before us, and so we really appreciate you
I
coming
just
up.
wanted to let you know, and then I was going to answer the questions.
Thank you. We
And
appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you.
No, we
you.
appreciate that. Welcome you coming next month, because they are supposed to come on the 14th.
I was determined to come to a meeting this week, and I can't.
Sorry. But they will be here on the 14th to speak to it. And we'll,
Chair, apologies. January 14th.
yes,
Yes.
the 14th. Same place,
And I will just say,
same
very
time.
interesting, and I do appreciate what you guys do. Agree.
Thank you.
I never knew before I came to my first FinCom meeting as well. I'm like, wow.
Well, I heard you say that in one of the meetings, that, come attend a meeting, see if you like it.
Yeah.
So be careful.
Yeah.
We always welcome
Yeah.
public comment and sharing feedback, so appreciate that. And I will ask town council for a copy of that to share with folks.
I do know that the select board will be in executive session on this coming Monday, and so that, they're certainly working on, I believe, what was put before them. So, again, and then from a FinCom perspective, as it comes to us, we will, talk about it in an open meeting format, and you're all welcome to attend.
That's great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Any other comments? No? Cool. I guess this is it.
Okay.
Move to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.
2 minutes over.